So here's a question that's going to bother you for the rest of the day. What happens when the fastest man alive can't outrun a grudge? I'm not talking about some metaphor here. I'm talking about a guy who literally drove 406 miles per hour in a car he built in his garage with junkyard engines and Depression-era transmissions. A guy who held more speed records than any human being who ever lived. 485 of them, and he was murdered in his own driveway over a business deal worth less than the car sitting in his garage. The killer walked free for almost 2 decades. This is the story of Mickey Thompson, and I promise you, no matter how much you think you know about racing history, about land speed records, about the golden age of American hot rodding, you don't know the story. Not really, not all of it. Because this isn't just a racing story. This is a story about obsession, about genius, about a man who simply could not stop pushing, and about what happens when that kind of relentless drive meets someone with an entirely different kind of ruthlessness. This is Legacy Motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the people who built speed culture with their bare hands and got written out of the mainstream history books. If you're someone who loves deep dives into the forgotten legends of motorsport and the real stories behind the machines, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. All right, let's go back to the beginning. And I mean the real beginning, not just Mickey Thompson's beginning, but the beginning of the world he was born into. Because you can't understand Mickey without understanding Southern California in the late 1940s. Here's the thing. The war had just ended, World War II, and thousands of young men came home to Los Angeles and the surrounding suburbs with a very specific set of skills and absolutely no idea what to do with them. These guys had spent years overseas fixing tanks, rebuilding aircraft engines, keeping military vehicles running in conditions that would make a modern mechanic cry. They knew metallurgy. They knew fabrication. They knew how to make broken things work with whatever was lying around. And when they got home, they found a country that was booming economically but didn't really have a place for that particular kind of talent. So they did what young men with too much energy and not enough direction have always done throughout history. They started racing. Dry lake beds, back roads, anywhere that was flat and empty and far enough from the cops. Hot rodding was born in the garages of suburban Los Angeles, and it was equal parts ingenuity, recklessness, and cheap surplus military parts that you could buy for pennies on the dollar. That's the world Marion Lee Thompson was born into. Everyone called him Mickey. Born in Alhambra, California, 1928. His father was a police captain. He had a sister named Colleen. And from the time he could hold a wrench, he was in the family garage tearing apart old Fords and Chevrolets and putting them back together better than they were before. He was accumulating the kind of deep, hands-on mechanical knowledge that no university could ever teach. The kind of knowledge you can only get by burning your fingers on hot headers and cutting your knuckles on rusty bolts and lying on cold concrete at 2 in the morning trying to figure out why the timing is off. After high school, Mickey took a job as a pressman at the Los Angeles Times. Night shift. He'd worked that job for a decade. But here's what most people don't realize about that arrangement. The night shift gave him his days free, and Mickey Thompson used every single one of them. He started drag racing on weekends. Then it wasn't just weekends anymore. It was every day he could get to a strip or a dry lake or anywhere else that would let him push a car to its limits. In 1953 and 54, he entered the Carrera Panamericana in Mexico. Now, if you don't know what that race was, let me paint you a picture. It was a border-to-border sedan rally that ran the entire length of Mexico. It is widely considered one of the most dangerous automobile races ever organized. The roads were barely roads. The spectators stood inches from the course. The cars were basically stock sedans being driven at racing speeds through mountain passes and across desert straightaways with no barriers, no runoff areas, and no margin for error. During one of Thompson's runs, spectators wandered onto the course. A child stepped into his path. Thompson swerved to avoid the kid, lost control of his car, and it rolled into the crowd. 5 people were killed. The race was so catastrophically deadly overall that Mexican officials canceled it permanently after the 1954 edition. Mickey Thompson carried the weight of that day for the rest of his life. But here's the thing about Thompson. It didn't slow him down. If anything, and this is important for understanding who he was, it sharpened him.
He became obsessive about preparation, about controlling every variable he possibly could, about making sure that when things went wrong, and they always go wrong at speed, the outcome was something he could survive and something the people around him could survive. That tragedy didn't make him cautious, it made him meticulous. There's a difference. By 1955, Mickey Thompson had become the first drag racer to exceed 150 miles per hour in the quarter mile. He'd already broken through 120 earlier that same period. And that same year, he talked his way into managing the brand new Lions Club associated drag strip in Long Beach. Now think about what this man was doing simultaneously. He was working the night shift at the Los Angeles Times, he was managing a drag strip, he was running a muffler shop, he was designing race cars, and he was setting speed records. He slept when he could, which apparently was almost never. At the Lions Strip, Thompson didn't just manage the facility, he transformed it. He gave hot rodders night races and grudge matches, and events that actually felt like events. He understood spectacle before the word was even part of the motorsport vocabulary. He sold tickets, ran concessions, directed crowds, and officiated races. And in between all of that, he found time to design what is generally considered the first slingshot dragster. That's the configuration that puts the driver behind the rear axle, which became the dominant layout in drag racing for decades. He also invented the Christmas tree starting light system. Before Mickey Thompson, drag races were started by a person standing between the cars waving a flag. Think about that for a second. Two cars making 1,000 horsepower each, separated by a few feet, and some poor soul standing between them with a piece of cloth. Thompson replaced that with the sequential light system that every drag strip in the world still uses a version of today. Every single one. He managed the Lions Strip until 1964, nearly a decade, while holding down the Times job and somehow finding time to build land speed cars in his garage at home in El Monte. But drag racing wasn't enough. Look, nothing was ever enough for Mickey Thompson. That's the thing you have to understand about him. The man had a hole in him that speed couldn't fill, that records couldn't fill, that success couldn't fill. He just kept pushing into the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. In 1950, at 21 years old, Thompson made his first trip to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. He drove a flathead-powered 1936 Ford Coupe out onto that vast white expanse, and something happened to him. The place got into his blood. He came back in 51 and 52 with modified cars, each one faster than the last. And somewhere during those trips, staring out across that endless white horizon where the ground and the sky blurred together and the heat shimmer made the mountains look like they were floating, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to break the land speed record. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's ambitious, but plenty of people have that dream. Here's where it gets really interesting. The land speed record in the 1950s belonged to the British. It had belonged to the British for decades. Sir Malcolm Campbell and his famous Bluebird cars, John Cobb and his Railton Mobile Special. These were gentlemen racers backed by the full financial and technical resources of the English motor industry. Rolls-Royce engines, Dunlop tires, teams of engineers with university degrees and wind tunnel access. Cobb's record stood at 394 miles per hour, set in 1947. It seemed absolutely untouchable. And here was Mickey Thompson, a pressman from Alhambra, California, grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, a checking account that couldn't cover a used motorcycle on a good day. No engineering degree, no corporate sponsor, no team of specialists, just a garage, a chalk line on the floor, and the level of stubbornness that bordered on clinical. In 1958, Thompson and his collaborator Fritz Voigt built a twin-engine streamlined car powered by two Chrysler motors. The front engine faced backward to power the front wheels. The rear engine sat conventionally. It hit 294 miles per hour. Fast. Genuinely fast. But not fast enough. Not even close to 400. So Thompson did the math. If two engines couldn't get the job done, four engines would. And this is where the story goes from impressive to absolutely insane. He went home to his garage in Monte, he got down on his hands and knees on the concrete floor, and he drew the outline of a car with a piece of chalk. That chalk outline became Challenger 1. Let me describe this machine to you because nothing like it had ever existed before, and nothing quite like it has existed since. 4 Pontiac 415 cubic inch engines, each one connected to a 1937 Cadillac transmission. All 4 transmissions controlled by a single shift lever. The front pair of engines face backward to drive the front wheels. The rear pair face forward to drive the rear wheels. 4-wheel drive at 400 miles per hour. The whole thing wrapped in a streamlined body so tight that his crew had to physically push him down into the cockpit like stuffing a cork into a bottle. It weighed close to 5,000 pounds. He built it with his own hands. His family helped, his friends helped. Every dime of his savings went into the car. Every dime. No corporate money, no government grants, no rich uncle. Just a man who believed he could go faster than anyone had ever gone and was willing to bet everything he had on it. The first attempt came in 1959. Challenger 1 hit 363 miles per hour. A class record, absolutely, but not the number Thompson wanted. Not even close to the number. He wanted 400. He went home and made changes. He added a 671 GMC supercharger to each of the 4 Pontiac engines, boosting the output to around 700 horsepower per motor. That's 2,800 horsepower total from 4 junkyard engines and 4 Depression-era transmissions, built in a garage with hand tools. Let me talk about the engineering challenges for a moment, because what Thompson did with Challenger 1 remains one of the most audacious things anyone has ever attempted in a home garage. The tire problem alone would have stopped most people. In 1959, no tire existed that could handle 400 miles per hour. At that speed, centrifugal force tries to tear the rubber apart from the inside. The tread wants to separate from the carcass, the sidewalls flex and generate heat that can melt the compound in seconds. Thompson went to Goodyear and pitched them on developing a custom tire specifically for his car. They listened. They agreed. Without those tires, Challenger 1 never leaves a trailer. The cooling was barely functional. At full speed, each of the 4 engines was producing enough heat to melt its own components. The fuel system had to feed 4 separate engines simultaneously at wide-open throttle. One bad fuel line, one clogged filter, and the whole thing comes apart at 400 miles per hour with you inside it. The aerodynamics were critical. At that speed, air resistance isn't just a factor, it's the factor. Thompson designed the body with sweeping curves, a tapered nose, and a profile barely 39 inches tall at the cockpit. The driver sat essentially flat, looking out through a tiny windscreen, breathing through an oxygen mask because the cockpit would fill with exhaust fumes. On an early test run, the oxygen line malfunctioned. Thompson passed out from the fumes inside the car. His crew found him nearly unconscious, wedged into the roll cage so tightly he couldn't remove the canopy himself. After that incident, the oxygen system became the very first thing they checked before every single run. And he built all of this without a computer, without CAD software, without finite element analysis, slide rules, intuition, and that bottomless, unreasonable stubbornness that was either his greatest gift or his fatal flaw. Probably both. September 9th, 1960, Bonneville Salt Flats, Utah. The sun was barely up. The salt stretched to the horizon in every direction, white and flat and featureless, like driving on the surface of another planet. The air was cool, but it wouldn't stay that way. In a few hours, the heat would turn the salt into a shimmering mirror and the surface would start to deteriorate. They had a window, and it was closing. Mickey Thompson strapped on a crash helmet, motorcycle leathers, goggles, and an oxygen mask that made him look like a fighter pilot from a decade earlier. His crew pushed him down into the sardine can cockpit. He could barely move. The roll cage was inches from his shoulders. The steering wheel was practically in his chest. He fired the engines, all 4 of them, and the sound was something between a thunderstorm and a building collapse. 4 supercharged Pontiac V8s screaming in unison, the exhaust bouncing off the salt flat and coming back as a physical force you could feel in your sternum. And he drove into history. 406.6 miles per hour, about the same speed as a bullet from a small caliber pistol, the fastest any American had ever traveled on land, the fastest any human being had ever traveled on wheels. He had broken John Cobb's record, the record that had stood untouched for 13 years. Mickey Thompson, the night shift pressman from Alhambra, was the fastest man in the world. Newsreels carried the footage across the country. It was 1960, the last great age of black and white news film, and Mickey Thompson was suddenly a household name. For about 30 minutes. Because here's the cruel detail that defines so much of Mickey Thompson's story. To make a land speed record official, you need 2 runs, an out and a back. The average of the 2 runs becomes your official speed, and on the return run, a drive shaft failed. Some sources say it was actually one of the Pontiac engines that let go, but Thompson wasn't about to publicly blame a sponsor. Pontiac was one of the few companies willing to support him. Either way, Challenger 1 couldn't complete the second pass. The record was unofficial. Mickey Thompson was the fastest man alive, and the record books wouldn't acknowledge it. That's the kind of detail that would destroy most people. It would break them. They'd go home, drink themselves into a stupor, and spend the rest of their lives telling anyone who'd listen about the time they almost had it. Thompson just shrugged, talked to the press, thanked his crew, and started planning his next move. Because he wasn't done, not even close to done. He was never done. He took the fame from Bonneville, unofficial record and all, and turned it into a career that touched virtually every corner of motorsport. In 1962, Mickey Thompson entered 3 cars at the Indianapolis 500, and these were not normal Indy cars, not even close. They were rear-engined, running stock Buick V8s. Every other car in the field was front-engined, with a race-tuned Offenhauser. The Offie, the engine that had dominated Indianapolis for decades. Nobody used stock engines at Indy. Nobody ran rear-engine configurations. The establishment thought Thompson was certifiably insane. He did not care, not even a little. Thompson's crew, led by Fritz Voigt, designed and built the cars in 120 days, working 12 to 14-hour shifts. Formula One champion Graham Hill tested one of them and flatly refused to race it, citing terrible handling. And Hill had a point. The cars had originally been designed around 12-inch wheels, but new rules required 15-inch tires. That changed through the entire balance-off. The geometry was wrong. The weight distribution was compromised. Thompson entered them anyway. It was the first stock block engine raced at Indianapolis since 1946. Now you might be thinking that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But here's what most people don't realize about that Indy effort. Within 2 years, every car at Indianapolis was rear-engined. Thompson saw the future before anyone else in that paddock. He was just too early and too underfunded to execute it perfectly. The following year, in 1963, Thompson founded Mickey Thompson Performance Tires. He also started Mickey Thompson Equipment Company, manufacturing valve covers, headers, intake manifolds, all the go-fast parts that every hot rodder in America needed. By the mid-70s, his wide oval tires were on the back of every muscle car cruising every boulevard in every city in the country. The brand became synonymous with performance. In '64, he brought 3 more cars to Indy. Dave McDonald qualified 14th in Thompson's number 83 car. On the second lap of the race, McDonald's car erupted into flames. He did not survive. Another driver, Eddie Sachs, was also killed in the resulting crash. It was one of the darkest days in Indianapolis history. Thompson went back in '65, failed to qualify. He never returned to Indianapolis again. But he didn't stop racing. He could never stop racing. In 1968, Thompson came back to Bonneville with a new weapon, Challenger 2. If Challenger 1 was a brute force hot rod built in a garage by a man with a dream and a chalk line, Challenger 2 was a surgical instrument. It was designed by Carcraft, the same outfit that helped Ford build the legendary GT40 that won Le Mans. The chassis was engineered with a precision that Challenger 1 never had. The body consisted of 68 hand-formed aluminum panels attached with Zeus fasteners. Two Ford 427 cubic inch V8s, one in front of the cockpit, one behind. The car was 32 feet long and only 27 inches tall at the nose. All-wheel drive, each engine powering one axle. It was built in 5 months. Early testing showed speeds approaching 400 miles per hour. Everything was working. The car was fast, stable, and ready. And then it rained. An unseasonal storm rolled across the Bonneville Salt Flats and turned them into a lake. The team couldn't run. They packed up, planning to come back the following year. But Ford pulled their sponsorship. Just like that. No money, no record attempt. Challenger 2 went into storage. Mickey Thompson's dream of an official land speed record died on a rain-soaked salt flat in Utah. But Thompson didn't stop. He never stopped, not for a single day. In 1968, he and Danny Ongais took 3 Ford Mustang Mach 1s to Bonneville and set 295 speed and endurance records. That's not a typo. 295 records in a single trip. Think about the logistics of that. The planning, the execution, the sheer volume of runs required. He won championships in 6 different categories of racing: off-road, midgets, sprint cars, sports cars, stock cars, and drag racing. He participated in over 10,000 races and drove over 1 million race miles. At the time of his death, he held 485 national and international speed and endurance records, more than any other person in history, more than any other person has held since. In 1969, Thompson discovered off-road racing. He teamed up with Danny Ongais for the Baja 1000 in a Bill Straup-prepared Ford F100 pickup. He had never raced off-road before. His entire career up to that point had been on pavement and packed salt, smooth surfaces, predictable surfaces. The desert was an entirely different world. Rocks the size of basketballs, silt beds that could swallow a truck to its axles, washed-out trails that disappeared without warning, cacti and cattle and spectators standing in the middle of the course just like the Carrera Panamericana 2 decades earlier. It did not matter. Mickey Thompson fell in love with off-road racing the way he fell in love with everything else, completely, obsessively, and with his entire being. His son Danny later said it was all his father talked about after that first Baja race. It consumed him. By 1973, Thompson had founded SCORE International, the sanctioning body that still oversees the biggest off-road races in North America to this day. The Baja 500, the Baja 1000. The man heard about a type of racing, tried it once, and within 4 years was running the entire sport. The Mexican government actually asked him to step in after issues with the previous sanctioning body. Thompson spent months mapping courses across the Baja Peninsula, negotiating with local officials, figuring out the impossible logistics of how to staff and manage races across hundreds of miles of empty desert with no infrastructure, no cell towers, and no margin for error. His wife Trudy handled the business logistics. She was the organizational backbone that allowed Mickey to be Mickey. When the workload got too heavy even for the two of them, he brought in Sal Fish to manage the day-to-day operations. Then Thompson went even further. Working with Trudy, he created the Mickey Thompson Entertainment Group. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. Take off-road racing, which normally happened in remote deserts where nobody could actually see it, and put it inside football stadiums. Short course racing, tight turns, big jumps, roaring engines, dirt and mud flying into the front rows. Trudy handled the business side. Mickey handled the spectacle. And it worked. They were filling stadiums across the country. Tens of thousands of fans paying to watch trucks and buggies tear around a dirt track in venues designed for football and baseball. It was entertainment. Pure, loud, visceral entertainment. And Mickey Thompson understood entertainment better than anyone in motorsport. By the mid-1980s, Mickey Thompson was one of the biggest names in American racing. Driver, engineer, promoter, tire manufacturer, off-road pioneer, sanctioning body founder, stadium racing inventor. He had built an empire from that chalk outline on his garage floor, and he was still restless because the land speed record was still out there. Challenger 2 was sitting in storage, and Mickey Thompson was not the kind of man who left things unfinished. In late 1987, with retirement from the day-to-day grind approaching, Mickey started thinking seriously about Challenger 2 again. The wheel-driven land speed record hadn't increased by a single mile per hour since the Summers brothers captured it in 1965, more than 2 decades of stagnation. Mickey still believed Challenger 2 was the fastest wheel-driven vehicle ever built. His health was declining, his body was paying the price for decades of abuse from racing and from the sheer physical toll of never slowing down. But his stubbornness had not diminished by a single degree. He called his son Danny. Danny was by then a successful racing driver in his own right. Mickey proposed a deal, a partnership, father and son, together. Mickey would handle the engineering. He'd modernize Challenger 2, update the systems, solve the problems that had kept them off the salt in '68. Danny would drive. They would go back to Bonneville together and finally get the record that had eluded Mickey for 3 decades. Danny agreed. Of course he agreed. How do you say no to that? Father and son started planning. It was early 1988. They had a car, they had a plan, they had a partnership built on decades of shared obsession. They had everything they needed except time, and they didn't know it yet. Now here's where the story takes a turn that changes everything. In the mid-1980s, Mickey Thompson had entered into a business partnership with a man named Michael Frank Goodwin. On the surface, Goodwin looked like a perfect match. He had essentially invented Supercross. He staged the first major indoor motocross race at the Los Angeles Coliseum back in 1972. He brought a rock concert promoter's energy to motorcycle racing and turned it into a stadium spectacle. Sound familiar? That's exactly what Mickey was doing with off-road trucks. On paper, the partnership made perfect sense. Thompson had stadium off-road racing. Goodwin had stadium motorcycle racing. Together, they would dominate the indoor motorsport entertainment market. It fell apart almost immediately. According to prosecutors who would eventually bring the case to trial, Goodwin had been planning to cheat Thompson from the very beginning. Their personalities clashed violently. Thompson was a self-made man who had built everything in his life with his own 2 hands. He had earned every dollar, every record, every ounce of respect through decades of relentless work. He did not tolerate being cheated, and he was not someone you wanted as an enemy, because he would pursue you with the same obsessive focus he brought to everything else. Within months, Thompson realized money was disappearing from their joint ventures, significant money. He sued Goodwin. A judge found that Goodwin had stolen more than $500,000 and ordered him to repay more than $768,000. Goodwin refused to pay. The case went to appeal after appeal after appeal. Each time, the ruling was upheld. Finally, the California Supreme Court issued what should have been the final word. Goodwin owed the money. Pay it. 2 weeks after that final ruling, Mickey and Trudy Thompson were dead. March 16, 1988, around 6 o'clock in the morning, Bradbury, California, a gated community about 24 miles from downtown Los Angeles, the kind of neighborhood where people moved specifically because they felt safe. Mickey opened the garage door for Trudy to pull her car out. As he walked toward his own vehicle in the early morning light, 2 hooded men appeared from near the front gate of the property. They had been waiting. They knew the routine. They knew the timing. They shot Mickey first. Then they dragged him up the driveway. One of the gunmen went after Trudy as she was backing her car out. He killed her in the vehicle. Then he walked back up the driveway to where Mickey lay and shot him in the head, execution style. The 2 men fled on bicycles, not in a car, on bicycles, through the quiet streets of a gated community at dawn. A neighbor was startled awake by the gunshots, then silence, then screaming. Mickey Thompson, screaming. Then nothing. On the bodies of Mickey and Trudy Thompson, investigators found approximately $500 in cash and $70,000 worth of jewelry. Nothing was taken, nothing was stolen. This was not a robbery. This was an execution. A contract killing carried out with cold precision in the driveway of a man who had spent his entire life trying to go faster than anyone else on Earth. The investigation stalled almost immediately. Detectives suspected Goodwin from the very first day. Multiple people came forward to report that they had heard Goodwin say he would have Thompson killed, that he was too smart to get caught, that Thompson would never see a dime of that judgment. A former police commander named Bill Wilson, the man who had originally introduced Thompson and Goodwin to each other, testified that Goodwin had looked him in the eye and told him he was going to take Mickey out. Wilson told him nobody wins that one. Goodwin said he was joking, but he wasn't laughing when he said it. But suspecting someone and proving it in a court of law are entirely different things. Goodwin had constructed an alibi. His car had been spotted near the Thompson home before the killings, but that alone wasn't enough for an arrest. There were no fingerprints at the scene, no DNA evidence, no murder weapon recovered, no identified shooters. What investigators did find, however, was a money trail that told its own story. Goodwin and his wife had purchased $275,000 in gold coins approximately 2 months before the killings. They had wired $400,000 to offshore bank accounts, and 5 months after the murders, they left the country on their yacht. They didn't come back for over 2 years. Not exactly the behavior pattern of an innocent man grieved the loss of a former business partner. The case went cold. Years passed, a decade, then another. Mickey Thompson's sister, Colleen Campbell, refused to let it die. She hired private investigators with her own money. She offered a $1 million reward for information. She appeared on America's Most Wanted. Colleen was no stranger to violence and no stranger to the criminal justice system. Her own son, Scott, had been murdered years earlier. His body had been dumped into the Pacific Ocean. She had helped solve that case herself through sheer determination and refusal to accept that the system had given up. She was a former city councilwoman, a former mayor. She knew how the bureaucracy worked and she knew how to apply pressure, and she was not about to give up on her brother. Slowly, painfully slowly, witnesses began to come forward. Over the course of years, approximately 15 people eventually testified that they had heard Goodwin threaten to kill Mickey Thompson. One witness claimed that Goodwin had actually confessed to the murders a full decade after they happened. Another witness said he had personally seen Goodwin scouting the Thompson neighborhood through binoculars in the days before the killings. In 2001, prosecutors brought the case before an Orange County grand jury. They declined to indict. Not enough evidence. In 2004, charges were finally filed in Los Angeles County. In October of 2006, a Pasadena Superior Court judge ordered Goodwin to stand trial for 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial was entirely circumstantial. No murder weapon, no forensic evidence connecting Goodwin to the scene, no identified gunman. Just witness after witness after witness who had heard Michael Goodwin say he was going to kill Mickey Thompson. The prosecution built their case on memories and patterns of behavior rather than physical evidence. The defense argued that being a terrible person didn't make someone a murderer. The prosecution argued that the pattern of threats, the financial maneuvering, the flight from the country, and the timing created a picture that pointed to one and only one conclusion. On January 4, 2007, nearly 19 years after the murders, the jury found Michael Frank Goodwin guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, Goodwin told the court he couldn't apologize because he wasn't guilty. He is currently incarcerated at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. Every appeal he has filed has been denied. In 2015, a 3-judge appellate panel acknowledged the complete absence of direct physical evidence but called the circumstantial case overwhelming. The 2 gunmen who actually pulled the triggers that morning in Bradbury have never been identified, never been found, never been charged. They are still out there somewhere, if they're still alive. The murder case took 19 years to resolve. That's almost exactly as long as Mickey Thompson's entire racing career. A man who held more speed records than any human being in history, who fundamentally changed drag racing, off-road racing, land speed racing, and tire technology, who built a 4-engine land speed car in his garage with junkyard parts, was killed over a business dispute worth less than $1 million. Less than the cost of a single modern racing engine.
Today, Mickey Thompson's legacy is embedded in every corner of motorsport, even if most people have no idea where it came from. Mickey Thompson Tires and Wheels is now a subsidiary of Goodyear, one of the largest tire companies in the world. Score International still sanctions and organizes the Baja races that Thompson mapped out across the Mexican peninsula. The Christmas tree starting lights he invented stand at every drag strip on every continent where people race cars. Stadium truck racing, the spectacle he and Trudy created together, evolved into the events that millions of people watch on television today. He has been inducted into 4 different halls of fame, all of them posthumously. Challenger 1 sits on permanent display at the World of Speed Museum in Wilsonville, Oregon. Its body panels are pulled back to reveal those 4 Pontiac engines that carried a newspaper pressman past 400 miles per hour. It looks like something from another era because it is from another era. No computer designed it, no wind tunnel shaped it, no algorithm optimized its aerodynamics. A man drew it on his garage floor with a piece of chalk and then built it with his bare hands. And Challenger 2. This is where the story has an ending that Mickey Thompson would have loved if he had been alive to see it. After the murders, Danny Thompson packed up his father's car and put it into storage. He didn't look at it for nearly 15 years. He retired from professional racing in 1995 and moved to Colorado, trying to build a life that wasn't defined by his parents' murder. But the Salt Flats have a way of calling people back. In 2003, Danny was invited to drive a restored streamliner at Bonneville. Something clicked inside him. The old pole, the one he'd inherited from his father, was still there. In 2010, Mickey Thompson Tires sent a trailer to Colorado to bring Challenger 2 to California. Danny and a team of dedicated specialists spent years restoring it. Much of the original car remained: the aluminum chassis, the 68 hand-formed body panels, the basic architecture that Carcraft had designed half a century earlier. But the engines were new. 2 2,500 horsepower aluminum Hemis running on 87% nitromethane. Dry block engines with no water cooling at all. The fuel itself provided all the cooling the engines needed. A single run consumed approximately 50 gallons, and the car lost roughly 500 pounds during a pass just from burning fuel. The tires had only 1/32nd of an inch of rubber on them. Any more would spin off from heat expansion at speed. In 2017, Danny set a two-way average of 406.769 miles per hour, 1/10 of a mile per hour faster than his father's historic run in 1960. Almost the exact same speed, in the same car, nearly 60 years later. Danny was not satisfied. He came back in 2018, and on August 12th at the Bonneville Salt Flats, he drove Challenger 2 to an official two-way average of 448.757 miles per hour, the fastest piston-powered wheel-driven vehicle in history. On one of the individual passes, the car hit 450.9 miles per hour. In a car his father designed in 1968, on tires with his father's name printed on them. Danny Thompson finished what his father started, in the same car, on the same salt, 50 years later. When people told Danny that the conviction of Goodwin should have given him closure, he was blunt. He said closure would have been his dad sitting in the grandstand, watching. Nothing about a prison sentence brings someone back from the dead. The car went to record speed, the record went into the books, and the empty seat stayed empty.
The thing about Mickey Thompson is that he defied every category anyone tried to put him in. He wasn't just a driver, he wasn't just an engineer, he wasn't just a promoter or a businessman or a tire manufacturer. He was all of those things simultaneously, often on the same day, frequently on no sleep. He designed the first slingshot dragster and the starting light system for the strip where he raced it. He took stock block engines to Indianapolis when every expert told him it couldn't work, and within 2 years the entire field had copied his rear engine layout. He chalked out a car on a garage floor and drove it faster than any human being had ever gone on wheels. He worked the night shift at a newspaper to pay for the fuel. He discovered off-road racing at 41 years old and was running the entire sport by 45. He set 485 speed records and died in his own driveway at 59 because a man he trusted couldn't accept losing a lawsuit. That is the story of Mickey Thompson, the speed king, the garage genius, the man who could build anything, drive anything, promote anything, and convince anyone to believe in whatever impossible thing he was attempting next. The man who was never, not once in his entire remarkable life, fast enough to outrun what was coming for him. And there you have it. If you knew Mickey, knew someone who knew him, or have ever stood in front of Challenger 1 and felt the weight of what one man accomplished with chalk and stubbornness and junkyard parts, drop it in the comments. Tell me your story. And if you made it this far through this one, you already know what to do. Subscribe. We go deep on stories like this, the ones that deserve more than a paragraph in a history book. We do it every single day. Hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.